There are twins beyond science in America whose mystery has disturbed investigators for years. Amelia and Lucas seem like ordinary 13-year-olds from a quiet Midwestern town, but their eyes hold secrets that no one can explain. When Amelia suddenly predicts a devastating storm with impossible accuracy, the town whispers grow louder. When Lucas begins experiencing his sister's visions before they happen, fear replaces fascination. These are America's most unexplainable children. Amelia sees a school bus crash in her dreams. She dismisses it as another nightmare. Days later, the accident happens exactly as she predicted. Several children are seriously injured. The town demands answers. Dr. Evelyn Harper arrives, believing the twins are connected to forces beyond human understanding. But as she digs deeper, she discovers their family history holds darker secrets than anyone imagined. Amelia's visions grow more intense. She feels the pain of others before it happens. Lucas sees his own death approaching. Their bond, once their strength, now threatens to destroy them both. When Amelia's final vision reveals a family tragedy that could obliterate their entire bloodline, the twins face an impossible choice. Can they escape the weight of their own power, or are they destined to face something far worse than death itself? Some mysteries defy explanation. Some children defy nature. What happens when the future refuses to stay hidden? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Amelia and Lucas sat by their bedroom window, watching the world move in slow motion below them. Their small Midwestern town stretched out like a patchwork quilt, each house containing families who whispered about the strange children on Maple Street. At 13, the twins possessed an otherworldly awareness that unnerved even the adults who tried to dismiss their peculiarities. Their reflections in the window glass seemed distorted, showing glimpses of something beyond the physical realm. Amelia's dark eyes held depths that shouldn't exist in someone so young, while Lucas mirrored her intensity with a quiet desperation that spoke of shared burdens. The town had always whispered about them, about Amelia's sharp, sudden outbursts that seemed to predict trouble, and about Lucas, who followed his sister like a shadow, always one step behind, but somehow connected to her thoughts. Their bond transcended normal sibling relationships. When Amelia felt pain, Lucas winced. When Lucas experienced fear, Amelia's hands trembled. They communicated through glances that carried more weight than words, understanding each other in ways that made their parents uncomfortable and their teachers nervous. The feeling that something was different had grown stronger lately. Amelia could sense it in the air, like static electricity before a thunderstorm. Lucas felt it too, though he couldn't name the sensation. They shared an unspoken moment. Lucas gave Amelia a look that conveyed everything he couldn't say, and Amelia nodded, acknowledging their mutual recognition that their world was about to change forever. The next morning during algebra class, Amelia suddenly gasped. The numbers on the blackboard blurred as her vision tunneled into something far more vivid than reality. She saw storm clouds gathering with impossible speed, lightning crackling across the sky in patterns that defied meteorological science. The wind howled with supernatural fury, and rain fell like bullets against windows that rattled in their frames. Her weathered notebook, a journal she'd kept since childhood, lay open beside her. Without conscious thought, she began writing in detailed, hurried script. The storm would arrive at 3:47 p.m. Wind speeds would exceed 90 miles per hour. The old oak tree by the courthouse would split down the middle. Mrs. Henderson's roof would lose 14 shingles. The power would fail for exactly 4 hours and 23 minutes. When the vision ended, Amelia found herself staring at pages of predictions written in her own handwriting, though she had no memory of writing them. Her classmates watched her with a mixture of fascination and fear. Her teacher, Mrs. Peterson, approached cautiously, reading over Amelia's shoulder with growing concern. That evening, as Amelia sat with Lucas in their shared bedroom, the first rumbles of thunder began. The weather service had predicted clear skies. By 3:47 p.m., the storm struck with exactly the intensity Amelia had foreseen. Every detail matched her written predictions with terrifying precision. Lucas felt the change in the air before the first raindrop fell, his body responding to Amelia's vision as if he'd experienced it himself. When the storm finally passed, leaving behind exactly the damage Amelia had documented, both twins understood that something fundamental had shifted in their lives. The line between prediction and reality had blurred beyond recognition. Word of Amelia's accurate prediction spread through their school like wildfire. During lunch, she experienced another vision, this time of Jenny Morrison slipping on wet stairs and spraining her ankle. The vision was less intense but equally clear. Amelia saw the exact step where Jenny would fall, the way her books would scatter, even the concerned faces of the students who would help her. The school accident report would later document every detail exactly as Amelia had foreseen. Jenny's fall occurred at 2:15 p.m. on the main staircase, resulting in a grade 2 ankle sprain that required crutches for 2 weeks. Some classmates were unnerved by Amelia's seeming ability to predict misfortune, while others watched her with awe, asking questions she couldn't answer. But that night, Amelia's dreams turned darker. She saw a yellow school bus filled with children she recognized. Kids from her neighborhood, friends from class. The bus rounded a familiar curve on Riverside Road. But something was wrong. The brakes failed. The vehicle careened off the road, rolling down the embankment toward the creek. She woke screaming, Lucas already sitting beside her bed. He'd felt her terror through their connection, experiencing fragments of the nightmares secondhand. The bus route map on her desk seemed to glow in the moonlight, marked unconsciously with red ink where the accident would occur. "It's just a dream," Lucas whispered, though his voice carried no conviction. They both knew better. Amelia's visions had never been wrong. The question wasn't whether the accident would happen, but when, and whether anyone would believe them enough to prevent it. Amelia dismissed the vision as her imagination running wild, desperate to believe that something so terrible couldn't possibly be real. But deep down, she knew the truth. The children on that bus were already living on borrowed time. 3 days later, Amelia sat in the kitchen with Lucas, both twins picking at their breakfast while their mother hummed absently at the stove. The vision of the bus accident had haunted Amelia's sleep, growing more vivid each night. She'd marked the exact location on her bus route map, circling the dangerous curve on Riverside Road where the brakes would fail. Lucas brushed off her concerns when she tried to explain, though his dismissal rang hollow. They both felt the weight of certainty pressing down on them like a suffocating blanket. Amelia wanted desperately to warn someone, the bus driver, the school, even her parents. But who would believe a 13-year-old girl claiming to see the future? The words stuck in her throat every time she tried to speak. How could she explain that she'd seen children she knew crying in twisted metal? How could she describe the sound of breaking glass and screaming without sounding like she'd lost her mind? Instead, she remained silent, hoping against hope that this one vision might be wrong. At 3:22 p.m. on Thursday afternoon, Bus 47 rounded the curve on Riverside Road, carrying 23 children home from school. The brake line, weakened by years of wear and a recent pothole impact, finally gave way. The bus careened exactly as Amelia had foreseen, rolling down the embankment in a symphony of destruction that would haunt the community for years. 7 children were hospitalized with serious injuries. 3 required surgery. 1 remained in intensive care for 2 weeks. Amelia watched from her bedroom window as ambulances raced past their house, sirens wailing their urgent song of tragedy. The guilt crashed over her like a tidal wave. She could have prevented this. She could have saved them. Instead, she'd chosen silence over courage, and children had paid the price for her cowardice. Lucas found her that evening, sitting motionless by the window, tears streaming down her face as she stared at the bus route map, marked with her prophetic red ink. The police arrived at their house 2 days after the accident. Detective Morrison, Jenny's father, sat in their living room asking careful questions while Amelia and Lucas perched on the edge of the couch like frightened birds. Their parents flanked them protectively, though confusion clouded their faces. The police interview transcripts would later document the strange coincidences surrounding the twins. Amelia's accurate weather prediction, her foresight about Jenny's accident, the bus route map found in her room marked precisely where the tragedy occurred. Detective Morrison read from his notes with growing bewilderment, unable to explain how a 13-year-old could have possessed such specific knowledge. Just coincidences, their father insisted, his engineering mind rejecting any supernatural explanation. Children have active imaginations. Sometimes random guesses happen to be right. But his voice carried uncertainty, and his eyes avoided direct contact with either twin. The community's whispers grew louder after the police visit. Neighbors crossed the street to avoid the family. Former friends stopped calling. Teachers watched Amelia with nervous anticipation, as if she might predict disaster at any moment. The twins found themselves increasingly isolated, marked as different in ways that made ordinary social interaction impossible. But in their shared isolation, something unexpected happened. Lucas began experiencing echoes of Amelia's visions, not the full intensity of her prophetic dreams, but shadowy impressions that confirmed their supernatural connection. He felt her emotional pain when visions struck. He sensed impending tragedy before she spoke of it. Their bond, already unusually strong, deepened into something that transcended normal human experience. Late at night, when the house was quiet and their parents asleep, the twins would sit together processing their shared burden. They were no longer just brother and sister. They had become two parts of something larger and more mysterious than either could comprehend. The realization both comforted and terrified them, binding them together while setting them apart from the rest of humanity. Dr. Evelyn Harper arrived in town on a Tuesday morning, driving a silver sedan that gleamed like hope in the autumn sunlight. Her research notes, meticulously organized in leather portfolios, contained years of documentation about children with unusual cognitive abilities. She'd heard about the twins through academic circles that whispered about supernatural phenomena disguised as psychological anomalies. Dr. Harper spent her first week observing from a distance, noting the twins' behavior patterns, their synchronized movements, the way they communicated through subtle glances that carried impossibly complex information. Her clinical observations filled pages with detailed descriptions of their otherworldly connection, documenting moments when they responded to unspoken thoughts and shared emotional states that shouldn't be possible. The twins fascinated her. In 20 years of studying gifted children, she'd never encountered subjects whose abilities so clearly transcended normal human experience. Amelia's predictive visions showed accuracy rates that defied statistical probability. Lucas's empathic connection to his sister suggested consciousness operating on quantum levels that mainstream science barely acknowledged. Dr. Harper requested a private consultation with the twins' parents, meeting them in the school counselor's office on a Friday afternoon. She spread her research across the desk: case studies of children with similar abilities, neurological scans showing unusual brain activity patterns, theoretical frameworks for understanding consciousness beyond conventional limitations. "Your children aren't ill," she explained carefully. "They're connected to something we don't yet understand. A higher plane of consciousness, perhaps. Quantum entanglement at the neurological level. Their abilities suggest they're accessing information through channels that exist outside normal space-time parameters." Their mother gripped their father's hand as Dr. Harper continued. "Mine need guidance, not treatment. Someone who understands that their gifts, while frightening, represent an evolution of human consciousness that we're only beginning to recognize. I'd like to help them learn to control and understand what's happening to them." The twins watched from the hallway, having snuck out of class to eavesdrop on the conversation that would determine their future. Amelia's abilities intensified as autumn deepened into winter. Her medical records began documenting unexplained symptoms: severe headaches that coincided with her visions, nosebleeds that preceded major predictions, seeds of unconsciousness that left her drained and disoriented. She could feel the pain of others before it manifested, experiencing their suffering as if it were her own. The empathic overload became unbearable. Walking through school hallways, Amelia absorbed the emotional residue of every student. Their anxieties about tests, heartbreak over failed relationships, fear of disappointing parents. The psychic noise created a constant background hum that made concentration impossible and social interaction excruciating. She began withdrawing from friendships that had already grown strained since the bus accident. Her former classmates watched her with suspicion mixed with fearful curiosity, whispering theories about her supernatural abilities when they thought she couldn't hear. But Amelia heard everything, sometimes even their thoughts, bleeding through the barrier between minds like water through cracked glass. Lucas became her only source of comfort, the one person whose presence didn't assault her with unwanted emotional information. Their connection had evolved beyond normal sibling bonds into something that provided mutual protection against the overwhelming psychic input that threatened to drive them both toward madness. One evening, Amelia experienced a vision of their grandmother's impending stroke. She saw the exact moment when the blood vessel would rupture, watched her grandmother collapse in her kitchen while reaching for a cup of tea. The vision included specific details: the time, the location, even the pattern of the spilled tea on the linoleum floor. She tried to warn her mother, speaking carefully about feeling worried about grandmother's health, but her concerns were dismissed as adolescent anxiety, her supernatural insights reduced to normal worry about an aging relative. When the stroke occurred exactly as she'd foreseen, 3 days later at 2:17 p.m. while grandmother prepared afternoon tea, Amelia's guilt deepened into something approaching despair. Dr. Harper's audio recordings captured Amelia's descent into trance-like states that defied medical explanation. The girl would sit motionless for hours, her eyes unfocused, speaking in cryptic sentences that seemed to reference events from past, present, and future simultaneously. Lucas remained constantly by her side during these episodes, serving as her anchor to present reality. "The water runs backward," Amelia whispered during one recorded session. "7 birds fall from the same tree, the mirror breaks before anyone touches it. Mother's tears taste like copper pennies." Harper documented every word, analyzing speech patterns that suggested Amelia was accessing information through nonlinear temporal perception. The girl's consciousness seemed to drift outside normal time constraints, gathering impressions from multiple probability streams before returning to present awareness. Lucas found Amelia in one of these states on a snowy Thursday morning, sitting by their bedroom window with her eyes reflecting the gray winter sky. She spoke without seeming to see him, her voice carrying the distant quality of someone speaking from another dimension. "The heart stops beating at sunset," she said. "Lucas cries tears that turn to ice. The funeral flowers are white chrysanthemums. Father won't speak for 3 days." When she emerged from the trance, Amelia had no memory of her words. But Lucas had recorded every prediction in the notebook they now shared, documenting the visions that increasingly centered on death and loss. He was afraid to ask who would die, afraid to know which family member's funeral would feature white chrysanthemums. For the first time, Lucas admitted his growing fear, not just of Amelia's visions, but of their shared destiny. They were 13 years old, but they carried the weight of knowledge that should have belonged to ancient oracles or divine prophets. The burden was crushing them both, transforming their childhood into something unrecognizable and terrifying. That night, Lucas held his sister while she sobbed, both twins understanding that their connection to the supernatural was growing stronger and more dangerous with each passing day. The town council meeting minutes from December documented the community's growing concern about the problem children on Maple Street. Parents demanded answers. Teachers requested transfers to avoid having the twins in their classes. Shop owners whispered about bad luck following the family wherever they went. The twins had become pariahs in their own community, symbols of supernatural threat that challenged everything the town thought it understood about reality. Amelia and Lucas experienced visions that came with increasing frequency and intensity. The supernatural episodes left them physically exhausted and emotionally devastated, their young minds struggling to process information that originated beyond human comprehension. They saw car accidents before they happened, predicted illnesses weeks before symptoms appeared, and felt the emotional pain of every person in their vicinity. The town's fear manifested in increasingly hostile behavior. Windows were broken at their house. Threatening letters appeared in their mailbox. Parents pulled their children away when the twins approached, as if proximity to them might somehow transfer their supernatural curse. The isolation pushed both children deeper into their shared world, away from the community that had rejected them. Dr. Harper attempted to provide reassurance, explaining to anyone who would listen that the twins represented an evolution of human consciousness rather than a supernatural threat. She spoke at community meetings about documented cases of enhanced cognitive abilities, about quantum consciousness theories that suggested human potential far beyond current scientific understanding. But fear proved stronger than reason. The town wanted simple explanations for complex phenomena, preferring to label the twins as dangerous rather than acknowledge the limitations of conventional reality. Dr. Harper's scientific approach offered little comfort to parents who watched their children predict tragedy with impossible accuracy. The twins retreated further into isolation, their abilities growing stronger as their connection to normal human society weakened. They were becoming something beyond ordinary children, evolving into beings whose consciousness operated according to rules that mainstream science couldn't explain or control. The Water Department crisis report documented the catastrophic contamination that struck their town in January. Chemical runoff from an abandoned factory had seeped into the municipal water supply, creating a public health emergency that required evacuating half the residential district. Families were displaced for weeks while environmental crews worked to neutralize the toxic contamination that threatened permanent ecological damage. Amelia had predicted the disaster with frightening specificity. Her vision showed the exact point where rusted pipes would fail, allowing decades of accumulated industrial waste to flood into the clean water system. She saw families falling ill, children developing rashes, elderly residents hospitalized with respiratory problems caused by contaminated shower water. But when she tried to warn authorities, her supernatural reputation preceded her. Officials dismissed her concerns as the fantasies of a disturbed child seeking attention. Environmental engineers assured the community that all safety protocols were functioning normally. Nobody wanted to acknowledge that a 13-year-old girl might possess knowledge that exceeded their professional expertise. When the contamination crisis erupted exactly as Amelia had foreseen, the community's anger focused entirely on the twins. Instead of recognizing their warning as an attempt to prevent disaster, people blamed them for causing the catastrophe through some form of supernatural malevolence. Logic gave way to superstition as frightened families sought someone to hold responsible for their suffering. The twins were accused of everything from witchcraft to demonic possession. Religious leaders spoke about children who had been touched by evil forces. Scientists who attempted to defend the family were shouted down by crowds that preferred simple explanations to complex reality. Dr. Harper's research was dismissed as academic nonsense that ignored the obvious supernatural threat posed by the twins. Lucas and Amelia watched their community turn completely against them, transforming from skeptical observers into an actively hostile mob that viewed their gifts as weapons rather than warnings. The twins realized they were no longer safe in the town where they'd been born, among people who had known them since infancy but now saw them as monsters. Lucas's hidden letters, discovered later in a shoebox under his bed, revealed the depth of his emotional struggle. Page after page of unsent messages expressed his desperate desire to escape their shared burden, to find somewhere they could live as normal children without the weight of supernatural responsibility crushing their spirits. "I dream about running away," he wrote, "somewhere nobody knows us, somewhere we can just be kids again. But I know Amelia needs me, and I need her. We're connected in ways that distance can't break. Even if we ran to the other side of the world, we'd still feel each other's pain." The twins' emotional connection began to fracture under the pressure of constant visions and community hostility. Lucas started distancing himself from Amelia, unable to cope with the second-hand trauma he experienced through their psychic bond. Every one of her visions hit him like an emotional earthquake, leaving him drained and terrified of what they might see next. Amelia felt his withdrawal like a physical wound. Their connection had always been her anchor to sanity, the one relationship that made their supernatural burden bearable. Without Lucas's emotional support, she found herself drowning in prophetic visions that offered no relief or escape. The breaking point came when Amelia experienced her most terrifying vision yet: Lucas's death. She saw him lying motionless in their shared bedroom, his face peaceful but lifeless, surrounded by the medical equipment that had failed to save him. The vision included details that made it impossible to dismiss as nightmare: the exact time of death, the specific cause, even the way the afternoon sunlight would fall across his still form. She tried to tell him about the vision, desperate to warn him of the danger she'd foreseen. But Lucas was no longer listening to her predictions, having decided that ignorance might be the only path to emotional survival. His rejection of their connection left Amelia feeling more isolated than ever, carrying the knowledge of his impending death with no way to prevent the tragedy she'd witnessed. Dr. Harper's secret research proposal, hidden in her locked briefcase, outlined plans to separate the twins for intensive study. She'd grown obsessed with understanding their supernatural connection, viewing them less as patients needing help and more as research subjects who might unlock fundamental secrets about human consciousness. Her proposal described controlled experiments that would test the limits of their psychic bond, isolation chambers to determine whether distance affected their connection, pharmaceutical interventions to suppress their abilities temporarily, even surgical procedures to examine potential neurological abnormalities that might explain their supernatural gifts. The twins discovered her true intentions when they overheard a phone conversation between Dr. Harper and her research colleagues. Hidden in the school hallway, they listened in growing horror as she described their abilities with clinical detachment, reducing their suffering to data points in an academic study that prioritized scientific discovery over their well-being. The subjects demonstrate unprecedented psychic phenomena, Dr. Harper explained to her distant colleague. Separating them temporarily would allow us to measure the degradation of their connection over time. We could map the neurological pathways responsible for their abilities, potentially developing methods to replicate or suppress similar phenomena in other subjects. The betrayal shattered whatever trust the twins had developed in the adult world. Dr. Harper had presented herself as their advocate, someone who understood and accepted their gifts when everyone else saw only threats. Learning that she viewed them as experimental subjects rather than children needing compassion destroyed their faith in anyone claiming to help them. That evening, they confronted Dr. Harper directly, repeating her words back to her with quiet fury. She attempted to explain that scientific understanding could help other children facing similar struggles, but her justifications rang hollow. The twins realized they could trust no one but each other, that the adult world would always prioritize its own interests over their welfare. Dr. Harper's research notes became meaningless when her subjects refused to cooperate, leaving her with incomplete data and broken relationships that couldn't be repaired through scientific methodology. The ancestral family journal discovered in their dusty attic contained entries dating back 6 generations, written in fading ink by relatives whose names had been forgotten. The pages documented a pattern of supernatural abilities that ran through their bloodline, like a persistent curse passed from parents to children across centuries of suffering. The journal revealed that their great-great-grandmother had experienced prophetic dreams that predicted the influenza outbreak of 1918. Her twin brother had possessed empathic abilities that allowed him to feel the emotional states of everyone in their village. Both had died young, found together in their childhood bedroom on a winter morning, their faces peaceful but their bodies inexplicably lifeless. Previous generations had faced similar fates, twins born every few decades with abilities that terrified their communities and ultimately led to their destruction. Some had been accused of witchcraft and driven from their homes. Others had been studied by early researchers who treated them like specimens rather than human beings. None had lived to see their 20th birthday. Amelia traced the handwritten entries with her finger, reading accounts that mirrored their own experiences with disturbing accuracy. The visions, the community rejection, the isolation that drove them deeper into their supernatural connection. Every generation had followed the same tragic pattern. "We're cursed," Amelia whispered, closing the journal with trembling hands. "Our family is cursed, and we're going to die young just like all the others." Lucas read over her shoulder, his face growing pale as he absorbed the historical evidence of their doomed destiny. The journal contained sketches of previous twins, drawings that showed children who looked remarkably similar to Amelia and Lucas. Even their physical features seemed to repeat across generations, as if the supernatural abilities came paired with specific genetic markers. The discovery filled them both with hopeless resignation. They weren't unique individuals struggling with unusual gifts. They were the latest victims in a family curse that had claimed dozens of lives across multiple centuries. The pattern suggested they had perhaps 2 or 3 years before meeting the same fate as their supernatural ancestors. Train station tickets found in Lucas's jacket pocket revealed his attempted escape plan. He'd researched bus routes to distant cities where they might live anonymously, away from their family history and community rejection. The tickets were dated for the following week, one-way passages to Portland where he'd hoped they could start fresh with new identities. But Amelia felt bound to their home by invisible chains stronger than logic or self-preservation. Her visions showed her that leaving wouldn't solve their problems. The supernatural abilities were part of them, not tied to any specific location. Running away would only delay their inevitable fate, while abandoning the family members who still needed their protection. Their argument reached a breaking point in their shared bedroom. Voices raised for the first time in years of careful communication. Lucas demanded freedom from the burden they'd inherited, while Amelia insisted they had responsibilities that couldn't be abandoned for the sake of personal comfort. "I can't live like this anymore," Lucas shouted, tears streaming down his face. "Every day is pain, every night brings nightmares. I can't feel your visions anymore without wanting to die myself. We have to leave before this destroys us completely." Amelia understood his desperation, but her sense of duty ran deeper than self-preservation. What about mother and father? What about the people we could save with advance warning? If we run away, we're just selfish cowards who let others suffer because we were too weak to handle ours. The fundamental disagreement about their purpose and responsibility drove them into separate emotional worlds. Lucas retreated to the guest bedroom, while Amelia remained surrounded by the artifacts of their shared supernatural journey. The journals, the maps, the recorded visions that documented their connection to forces beyond human understanding. For the first time since childhood, they were truly alone, cut off from the empathic bond that had sustained them through years of increasingly difficult challenges. The separation felt like emotional amputation, leaving both twins incomplete and vulnerable to the supernatural forces they'd always faced together. Neither realized that their division was exactly what the family curse had always required to claim its victims. Hospital admission forms documented the sudden illness that struck their father on a February morning. The official diagnosis was acute cardiac arrhythmia, a heart condition that materialized without warning in a previously healthy 45-year-old man. But Amelia had seen every detail of his collapse weeks before it occurred, including the exact moment when his heart would skip its fatal beats. The family tragedy Amelia had foreseen manifested exactly as her visions had predicted. Silas kept thinking of their father collapsed in his workshop while repairing a broken chair, the white chrysanthemum petals from their mother's flower arrangement scattered around his unconscious form. Lucas found him first, his tears freezing on his cheeks in the cold garage air as he knelt beside their father's motionless body. The twins' bond was tested beyond endurance as they faced the reality of loss they'd been unable to prevent. Lucas spiraled into guilt-ridden despair, believing that their supernatural abilities should have provided enough warning to save their father. Amelia carried the additional burden of having foreseen the tragedy in vivid detail, while remaining powerless to change the outcome. Their mother aged years in the space of days, her face etched with grief that seemed to deepen every hour. She blamed herself for not taking Amelia's earlier warnings seriously, for dismissing her daughter's concerns about their father's health as teenage anxiety rather than supernatural insight. The funeral featured white chrysanthemums exactly as Amelia's vision had shown, their father's peaceful face surrounded by flowers that mocked the family's overwhelming sorrow. Community members who had previously shunned the twins now watched them with fearful curiosity, wondering if their presence at the service might somehow predict additional tragedies. Lucas spoke to no one for 3 days following the funeral, his silence fulfilling the final detail of Amelia's prophetic vision. The twins sat together in their father's empty workshop, surrounded by unfinished projects that would remain forever incomplete, both understanding that their supernatural gifts had failed them when they needed them most. The loss shattered their remaining faith in the purpose of their abilities, leaving them questioning whether their visions served any meaningful function beyond causing additional suffering. The eviction notice arrived during their period of deepest grief, the town's final attempt to force their family away from the community that had never accepted their supernatural gifts. Legal documents cited property violations and community complaints, but everyone understood the real motivation: fear of children whose abilities defied rational explanation. Complete social ostracism followed their father's funeral. Former friends crossed the street to avoid encountering their family. Shop owners refused their business. Even their mail carrier left packages at the street rather than approaching their front door. The twins had become untouchable, symbols of supernatural threat that contaminated everything they touched. The isolation drove Amelia and Lucas into separate emotional despair as their relationship reached its lowest point. They could no longer communicate through their traditional empathic connection, having closed themselves off from each other's pain in desperate attempts at self-protection. The silence between them felt worse than the community's rejection, creating a void where their greatest source of strength had once existed. Amelia retreated into obsessive documentation of her visions, filling notebook after notebook with prophetic warnings that no one would ever believe or act upon. Her predictions grew darker and more violent as her emotional state deteriorated, showing her glimpses of tragedies she was powerless to prevent. Lucas stopped eating regularly, his physical health declining as rapidly as his emotional stability. He spent hours staring out their bedroom window at the town that had rejected them, wondering if their father might still be alive if they'd never been born with their supernatural curse. Their mother worked double shifts to pay for their father's medical bills, leaving the twins alone for hours in a house that felt haunted by unfulfilled potential and abandoned dreams. The family that had once provided emotional stability disintegrated under the weight of loss and community pressure, leaving everyone isolated in their own private versions of hell. The twins' relationship, once their source of strength and identity, collapsed completely under the accumulated pressure of grief, rejection, and supernatural responsibility they were too young to bear alone. Amelia's dark prophecy sketches filled the margins of every surface in their shared bedroom. Disturbing drawings depicted scenes of violence and death, rendered in childish artistic style that made their content even more unsettling. She drew families destroyed by supernatural forces, children consumed by abilities they couldn't control, communities torn apart by fear and misunderstanding. Both twins existed in separate emotional despair, isolated from each other and the world that had rejected them. Amelia's visions had grown darker and more violent as her mental state deteriorated, showing her apocalyptic futures where supernatural abilities spread like a plague across humanity. She saw cities burning, governments collapsing, civilization destroyed by forces beyond human comprehension. Lucas experienced his own private breakdown in the guest bedroom where he'd taken refuge from their shared supernatural connection. He scratched countdown marks on the wall beside his bed, marking the days until he would reach the age when previous generations of twins had died. Each mark represented another day of suffering, another 24 hours of carrying burdens that normal children couldn't imagine. The house fell silent except for the scratching of Amelia's pencil as she documented visions of destruction, and Lucas's quiet sobs that echoed through the thin walls separating their rooms. Their mother worked longer hours to avoid confronting the reality of her children's deteriorating mental health, leaving them alone with supernatural forces that seemed to grow stronger as their emotional connections weakened. In his darkest moment, Lucas realized how desperately he needed Amelia's presence to maintain his sanity. Their separation had created a psychic void that left him vulnerable to the full intensity of supernatural input without the buffering effect of their shared consciousness. He was drowning in prophetic visions he couldn't process alone, experiencing Amelia's pain through their damaged connection while lacking the ability to provide or receive comfort. The twins had reached the breaking point that had claimed previous generations, approaching the moment when their supernatural abilities would either destroy them completely or force them to find new strength in their connection to forces beyond human understanding. Lucas's handwritten apology letter, slipped under Amelia's bedroom door, contained words that bridged the emotional chasm that had separated them for weeks. Written in shaky script that revealed the depth of his emotional exhaustion, the letter acknowledged his mistakes while expressing desperate need for their connection. "I can't survive without you," he wrote. "I thought running away would save us, but I was wrong. We're meant to face this together. Whatever happens, we need each other more than we need escape from our gifts. I'm sorry for abandoning you when you needed me most." After days of painful separation, the twins experienced a moment of reconciliation that felt like returning to life after near-death experience. They sat together in their childhood bedroom, surrounded by the artifacts of their supernatural journey, slowly rebuilding the empathic connection that had sustained them through years of increasingly difficult challenges. The reunion wasn't easy. Too much pain had passed between them for simple forgiveness. But underneath their hurt and anger lay the unshakable recognition that their bond represented something larger than individual survival. They were two parts of a consciousness that operated according to rules beyond normal human experience, and separation had nearly destroyed them both. Lucas felt immediate relief as their psychic connection reopened, the overwhelming supernatural input becoming manageable again through their shared processing. Amelia's visions seemed less terrifying when filtered through their combined consciousness, while Lucas's empathic abilities provided the emotional stability she needed to maintain her sanity. They realized that their connection to each other was the only thing keeping them anchored to humanity, while their abilities pushed them towards something beyond ordinary human experience. Their bond remained their greatest source of strength and their only hope for survival in a world that would never fully accept or understand their gifts. The family curse had tried to divide them, but their love for each other proved stronger than the supernatural forces that had claimed previous generations of twins. The scientific study contract Dr. Harper presented represented her final attempt to unlock the secrets of their supernatural abilities. The formal document outlined a comprehensive research program that would involve months of testing in specialized facilities designed to measure and document psychic phenomena beyond current scientific understanding. Dr. Harper had learned from her previous mistakes, approaching the twins with apparent respect for their autonomy, while describing opportunities to help other children facing similar supernatural challenges. Her presentation emphasized the potential benefits of understanding their gifts, rather than suppressing or exploiting them for academic gain. But Amelia and Lucas saw through her careful words to the underlying agenda that prioritized scientific discovery over their personal welfare. The contract's fine print revealed provisions for extended separation, pharmaceutical interventions, and experimental procedures that reduced them to research subjects rather than individuals deserving protection and compassion. Their refusal surprised Dr. Harper, who had expected desperate children to welcome any opportunity for professional help. Instead, she encountered teenagers who had matured beyond their years through supernatural suffering. Young adults who understood that their abilities were part of their identity rather than problems requiring scientific solutions. "We don't need to be fixed," Amelia explained with quiet dignity. "We need to learn how to live with gifts that will always set us apart from normal people. That's not something science can teach us. It's something we have to discover for ourselves." Lucas nodded agreement, adding, "Our abilities aren't diseases to be cured or puzzles to be solved. They're part of who we are, part of what makes us connected to each other and to forces beyond ordinary human experience. We have to embrace our destiny rather than fighting against it." Dr. Harper left town that afternoon, her research incomplete and her theories unproven. The twins watched her car disappear into the distance, understanding that they were truly alone in learning to control and direct their supernatural gifts toward purposes that transcended personal survival. Amelia's final prophecy came during a peaceful moment as she sat by their bedroom window, watching snow fall on the town that had rejected them. The vision differed from all her previous supernatural experiences. Instead of tragedy and destruction, she saw peace, acceptance, and a future where their gifts served purposes greater than personal survival. The final prophecy showed her and Lucas standing together as adults, their supernatural abilities fully integrated into lives dedicated to helping others who faced similar challenges. She saw them running a sanctuary for children with unexplained gifts, providing the understanding and support they'd never received during their own supernatural awakening. In the vision, their hometown had transformed from a place of fear and rejection into a community that recognized their value as protectors and guides. The same people who had once driven them into isolation now brought their own supernatural children for training and support, understanding that gifts like theirs required nurturing rather than suppression. Most importantly, the vision showed them surviving beyond the age that had claimed previous generations of twins. Love for each other and their commitment to serving others had broken the family curse that demanded early death as payment for supernatural abilities. Amelia shared the vision with Lucas, both twins finding hope in the possibility of a future that extended beyond mere survival. They realized that their gifts carried responsibilities as well as burdens, that their abilities meant they were called to serve purposes larger than personal happiness or comfort. The final prophecy gave them the courage they needed to face whatever challenges lay ahead, secure in the knowledge that their suffering had meaning and their connection would endure whatever tests the future might bring. For the first time since childhood, they felt genuinely optimistic about their destiny, understanding that they were meant to transform their supernatural curse into something that could heal rather than destroy. The first positive response from their community came in the form of a handwritten letter from Mrs. Peterson, Amelia's former algebra teacher. The note acknowledged the twins' supernatural gifts while requesting help with her own daughter, who had recently begun experiencing prophetic dreams that terrified the entire family. Word spread quietly through networks of families dealing with children whose abilities defied rational explanation. Parents who had previously shunned the twins now approached them carefully, desperate for guidance in handling supernatural phenomena they couldn't understand or control. Amelia and Lucas returned to their town not as the frightened children who had been driven into isolation, but as young adults who had learned to control and direct their abilities toward healing rather than destruction. Their supernatural gifts had matured into tools for helping others navigate similar challenges with greater wisdom and support. They established informal counseling sessions in their childhood home, creating a safe space where children with unusual abilities could explore their gifts without fear of judgment or exploitation. The twins served as proof that supernatural abilities didn't have to destroy young lives, that proper guidance could transform curses into blessings. The community's acceptance came slowly, built through demonstrated results rather than theoretical understanding. Families who brought their children to the twins reported improvements in control and emotional stability, evidence that supernatural abilities could be channeled constructively rather than merely suppressed or feared. Their mother played a crucial supporting role, having learned to embrace her children's gifts as part of their identity rather than problems requiring solutions. The house that had once felt haunted by supernatural forces became a sanctuary where unusual abilities were celebrated rather than hidden. The twins healed not just from their traumatic experiences, but from the isolation and rejection that had nearly destroyed their faith in humanity. Their journey from cursed children to community healers demonstrated the transformative power of acceptance and understanding. Lucas's travel journal documented his plans for exploring the world beyond their small Midwestern town. After years of isolation and supernatural struggle, he felt ready to discover how their gifts might serve larger purposes in communities that had never heard of the twins' reputation or family history. The decision to separate temporarily represented growth rather than abandonment of their connection. Both twins had matured beyond the desperate codependence that had characterized their childhood, evolving into individuals who could maintain their psychic bond across any distance while pursuing separate goals and interests. Amelia offered her blessing for his journey, understanding that their connection transcended physical proximity. Their supernatural abilities had taught them that consciousness operated according to rules that made geographic separation irrelevant to truly meaningful relationships. "We'll always be connected," she assured him as he packed his few belongings. "Our bond isn't dependent on being in the same place. You need to explore what's possible beyond this town, and I need to continue helping the children who are just beginning to discover their own gifts." Lucas promised to return regularly, bringing stories and insights from his travels that would enrich their shared understanding of supernatural phenomena. His journey would serve as research into how their abilities might be received and utilized in different cultural contexts, expanding their knowledge beyond the limitations of their isolated childhood experiences. The farewell felt more like a beginning than an ending, the start of a new phase in their supernatural development that would test the strength of their connection while allowing both twins to grow as individuals. They had learned that true love meant supporting each other's growth rather than limiting each other's possibilities. Lucas left on a Tuesday morning, his figure disappearing into the distance while Amelia watched from their childhood window, both twins confident that their bond would endure whatever challenges the future might bring. Amelia's guidance manual, handwritten in the same notebook where she'd once documented terrifying visions, contained practical wisdom for children beginning to experience supernatural abilities. Page after page offered advice gained through years of difficult experience, providing the support and understanding she'd never received during her own supernatural awakening. The manual covered everything from managing the emotional overwhelming that accompanied psychic sensitivity to techniques for controlling and directing prophetic visions toward constructive purposes. Amelia wrote with the voice of someone who had survived the worst aspects of supernatural development while discovering the potential for growth and service. She fully understood and accepted her abilities as part of her identity rather than burdens to be endured. The gifts that had once threatened to destroy her had become tools for helping others navigate similar challenges with greater wisdom and support than previous generations had ever received. Children with developing supernatural abilities traveled from distant states to work with Amelia, brought by parents who had heard stories of her successful integration of psychic gifts into a meaningful life. She provided the guidance and mentorship that could transform potentially destructive abilities into sources of strength and purpose. Her work expanded beyond individual counseling to include research into the hereditary patterns that seem to govern supernatural abilities. She documented family histories that revealed genetic connections spanning multiple generations, building a database that helped predict and prepare for the emergence of psychic gifts in new children. The girl who had once felt cursed by her connection to forces beyond human understanding had become a beacon of hope for others facing similar challenges. Her transformation from terrified child to confident mentor demonstrated the potential for growth that existed within even the most overwhelming supernatural experiences. Amelia stood by the window where her journey had begun, but now the world felt welcoming rather than alien, filled with possibilities for service rather than sources of fear. The newspaper article that documented their inspiring stories spread far beyond their small Midwestern community, reaching families across the nation who were struggling with children whose abilities defied conventional explanation. The twins had become symbols of resilience and hope, proof that supernatural gifts could be integrated into meaningful lives rather than viewed as curses requiring suppression. Their legend grew through word-of-mouth networks of parents dealing with psychic children, creating an informal community of families who supported each other through challenges that mainstream society couldn't understand. The twins' story provided evidence that unusual abilities might represent evolution rather than pathology, human potential expanding beyond current scientific limitations. Amelia and Lucas had transformed from isolated outcasts into respected figures in communities that valued supernatural gifts rather than fearing them. Their journey from rejection to acceptance demonstrated the power of persistence, love, and mutual support in overcoming seemingly impossible obstacles. The family curse that had claimed previous generations was broken, not through escape or suppression of their abilities, but through embracing their gifts as tools for serving others. Their connection to forces beyond human understanding had become a source of strength rather than destruction, healing rather than suffering. As Amelia looked out over the town where she'd been born, she smiled with genuine contentment. The community that had once driven them into isolation now sent their children to her for guidance and support. The gifts that had once seemed like supernatural curses had revealed themselves as profound blessings. Their journey through darkness had led to something beautiful and transformative, proof that even the most overwhelming challenges could be conquered through love, courage, and unwavering commitment to each other and to serving purposes greater than personal survival. The twins had found their place in the world, and the world had finally found room for their extraordinary gifts.